1 minute. Someone's keying their microphone. Okay, stand by for systems. Okay, Steve. Okay, you got that. Someone.
After years of unanswered questions, a break in the unsolved Gilgo Beach murders out of Long Island.
All right, I'm done. I'm done. You're all right. You're all right. You're all right.
You're dead, man.
A little bit earlier, the Hampton County District Attorney just released new evidence in the abduction and murder of Holly Karanen of Sturbridge,
A forced serial killer more than 30 years after the last victim was found.
The New Bedford highway murders terrorized the South Coast back in the 80s, and as chief investigator Cheryl Fiandato reports, one victim's family believes the case is one tip away from being solved.
There are new developments in a case that terrorized the central U.S. for decades. Investigators believe the BTK killer may have had more victims than we first knew. Emily Akena now on what they found in his backyard this week.
Hey! You look at Hey! Hey! 43! 43! Hey! Put your hands up! Put your hands up! Get on the ground! Hey, you got one in the back! One in the back! I swear to God! That's it! You move your hands! Light pants coming down the hill! Got two on foot! That's the problem. Y'all want coming down the ramp. I'm gonna tell you, get off you, boy. Coming down the ramp, gray sweatshirt, black pants, mask on. Guy just jumped down. Hey, he just jumped down.
Yeah, we will. What have you been arrested for? You ever been arrested before?
Danny, where's your car?
Never been arrested before in LA?
Fourth way down.
How long ago? Sit up. How long ago?
Let's get on the
What's your name? What's your name?
I love it.
Developing this morning, new insight into capturing a suspected serial killer. The California man is believed to be behind a string of brutal murders that started back in July. Well, police say he was caught yesterday while he was hunting for another victim. Here's CBS's Bradley Blackburn.
Stockton, California police say this is the suspected serial killer who has had an entire city frozen in fear. Wesley Brownlee was arrested just after 2 a.m. Saturday near his Stockton home.
Tonight in Moscow, Idaho, Brian Koberger, the man charged with stabbing 4 college students to death, now indicted by a grand jury.
It would have made a frightening Hitchcock thriller if the crimes hadn't been real. A killer was stalking Boston women, raping and strangling them. In the most grotesque manner, he would display his work, and he always left a bizarre calling card, a nylon tied in a granny knot around the neck of each victim.
Good evening. Welcome to 22 News at 11. An intriguing development tonight concerning the search for the killer of Molly Bish.
Understandably, security is extremely tight here at the Pensacola City Jail. On the second floor of this building, Ted Bundy is under constant guard. Authorities are very well aware of the fact that Bundy has twice escaped from jail, and now that they know who he is, they are not about to let him slip away again. When he was arrested shortly after midnight on Wednesday, he was just considered a belligerent speeder. He fought with arresting officer David Lee when Lee stopped him for speeding. Only late last night, following FBI fingerprint identification, did Pensacola police learn they had captured one of the most wanted and, according to the FBI, most dangerous criminals in the country.
On the evening of February 9th, 2004, almost 18 years ago, Maura Murray crashed her car on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, never to be seen again.
I can't. Negative. I can't say. All I can say is this man needed help. This man seemed like a man who was coming up to a storm or to a climax. This very blood-curdling thing at one of the cutoffs where he said, children kill, and then a sort of an agonized cutoff, enough to turn your hair whiter than mine.
So inside the thrift shop, St. Vincent de Paul, attorney Melvin Belli and the San Francisco police waited for the Zodiac killer.
What's up, Devin?
We're going to have a great time together.
It may be the creepiest episode ever on The Dating Game, because this bachelor looking for love back in 1978 is actually a serial killer.
This afternoon, we have learned a convicted pedophile who admitted to assaulting dozens of children will not be getting out of prison today.
A lawyer for Wayne Chapman tells us several things need to be done before he's officially released. Many people are upset that Chapman will even go free. WBZ's Anna Myler has more now at noon from Shirley.
Well, it is a case that has never gone cold for the family of Holly Peranian, who would have turned 40 years old last month. Today, investigators renewed their call for the public's help with this investigation. Much of it centered on this T-shirt that you see behind me, which was among items found in the area of Brimfield, where Holly's remains were uncovered back in October of 1993. Take a closer look at it, with a very distinguishing color and Boston logo. Within the past 6 months, further forensic testing has been done, thanks to advances in testing procedures. Investigators want some very specific information related to it, and Holly Peranian's family hopes to finally have some closure.
Kohberger has yet to enter a plea, but his previous attorney said he believes he'll be exonerated. The indictment follows his December arrest at his family home in Pennsylvania. More than 45 days after Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were found brutally murdered in this college house. According to court documents, Kohberger's DNA was found on a knife sheath at the crime scene, and his white Hyundai Elantra seen driving here during a routine traffic stop.
Devastating crime. They compare, in the annals of crime, they compare absolutely with Jack the Ripper. Perhaps even worse, because they were quiet and deadly.
The Strangler's first victim was Anna Slessers, a 55-year-old divorcee, brutally beaten and strangled while a parade passed down her Back Bay Street. From June 1962 until January 1964, 10 more women would die the same way.
Believes he may have uncovered evidence that could lead to Molly's murderer. A lengthy article in the Worcester Telegram chronicles a custody investigation that ended with Gerald Battistoni serving up to 12 years for raping his girlfriend's daughter.
The former Tacoma and Seattle resident is a suspect in 36 sex killings in Colorado, Utah, Oregon, and Washington. And now he is being questioned in connection with 2 murders at a sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee.
As officials announce a suspect is now in custody. Multiple news outlets now reporting the suspect is 59-year-old Rex Feuerman of Massapequa Park.
Okay, everybody, let's go. 10 seconds. Let's put out 30 seconds. Last round. Roger. 008, hold us heading. I'm in the King 004. How does that look? Looks good, Steve, and all systems are okay here. The winds are westerly at 10 knots. Okay, this is NASA 1 calling 10 seconds now. 10 seconds, roger. 0, 5, 4, 3, 2, I've got a blowout. Day for 3. Get your pitch to 0. Pitch is out again. Hold altitude. Hurricane, Hey, my girl, I can't hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a great autumn day, and autumn is my favorite time of year. And I feel much better about the New England Patriots today than I did last week. And I feel pretty optimistic about their chances in Dallas. So they've played nothing but good teams so far this year. People forget that. We were in the game the first two games. The Jets were supposed to be a very good team. They lost Aaron Rodgers for the seasons, and so Zach Wilson is horrible. So I guess it's not fair to call them a good team at this point. I want to today go over this fairly, objectively, and apply the knowledge that I have of the case and some inside knowledge. But I want to really try to both sides this article, and I don't think there's any reason for anybody to get alarmed or upset or get going. But let's just go over it carefully. This is an article in Boston Magazine by a writer named Gretchen Voss. And I think it was extremely well written. Hold on a second. I got to let the dogs out. I think it was extremely well written and researched and balanced. I think the article was balanced and fair. I think the article basically took both sides, and they spoke to Karen. They spoke to Karen's lawyers. They spoke to Aidan Kearney. I think they even spoke to Colin. And there is a little bit of new news in the article, so it's newsworthy, although you can weigh the evidence. So the article was called "The Karen Reed Case in Canton, the Killing That Tore a Town Apart. Did a successful South Shore woman really kill her police officer boyfriend? Or, as she claims, did a slew of dirty cops frame her?" Inside the simmering tabloid drama dividing the tight-knit Massachusetts suburb. So let's get to the article. Snow had just started to fall as John O'Keefe and Karen Reed stepped into the Waterfall Bar and Grill on Washington Street, Canton's main drag, on a Friday night in late January 2022. At around 11 p.m., it was the couple's second stop of the night after visiting another local pub. O'Keefe, a burly, brown-haired Boston Police Department officer, had been living in Canton since 2014, raising his niece and nephew after his sister died of a brain tumor and her husband succumbed to a heart attack 2 months later. The kids affectionately called their Funkle by the nickname JJ. For the past 2 years, he had dated Reed, an equity analyst and adjunct professor at Bentley University, who lived in Mansfield but spent much of her time at O'Keefe's helping with the kids. So I will just stop here to point out that so she's a very intelligent woman, educated, and from everything I've heard, I think the kids seem to like her. And she's in a situation where she was helping raise kids that were not her own. Okay, let's go on. Inside the car, O'Keefe spotted friends sitting at a high top near the band, and he and Reed walked over to join them. At the table sat O'Keefe's neighbor, Chris Albert. Letting Harry out. Town selectman. I don't think he was town selectman at the time, though, so that might be a mistake. But he is. He owns a local pizza sub shop there. His brother, Brian Albert, was also there, a Boston Police Department officer who leads the fugitive apprehension team and was featured on TNT's Boston's Finest, and Brian's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe. All had been raised in Canton, a middle-class town of some 24,000 people located about 20 miles south of Boston, where families, lives, and social calendars are often dictated by high school and weekend sports. That night, as the storm rolled into town, parents in the bar had a pretty good hunch they'd get a hall pass from the typical Saturday grind of shuttling kids to sporting events because of the storm. As the band played, the mood was festive and upbeat. O'Keefe downed beers while Reed drank vodka sodas, lots of them. And that's confirmed by the surveillance video, but also by the blood alcohol level that she showed the next day. So she can hold her liquor. Nothing wrong with that. She also, I can add that the reports from, I think, the Alberts in the bar were that she showed no signs of being intoxicated, and she was able to drive. So she can handle herself. When the clock ticked to midnight, it was nearly last call. The night wasn't over, though. Brian Albert announced he was headed home to have a beer with his son for his birthday. His son was 23, and invited the group to join. O'Keefe wanted to keep the party going. Reed, tired, buzzed, and hungry, was less sure, but agreed to at least give him a ride. On the way out, O'Keefe grabbed a half-full cocktail glass off the table, took a slug, and carried the rest of the drink out the door with him. The rules don't apply to cops. The couple walked over to Reed's black Lexus SUV, leaving foot tracks in the white dusting of snow, and climbed inside. Reed sat behind the wheel, and O'Keefe plugged the address, 34 Fairview Road, into Waze before they drove off. When they arrived at Albert's home, O'Keefe stepped out of the car. Reed, though, decided to leave. Several hours later, around 4:30 a.m., Reed says she woke up alone in the same clothes from the evening before on the couch at O'Keefe's house. That makes sense. So from a living room window, she could see the nor'easter bearing down hard. His niece was asleep upstairs, and his nephew was at a sleepover, but O'Keefe was nowhere to be found. So at that time, there's two people in the house, Karen and the niece, who I think was 14. Reed says she thought to call McCabe to ask if she'd seen O'Keefe. Reed didn't have her number, but knew that O'Keefe's niece, who is close friends with McCabe's daughter, probably did. Excuse me. Drinking coffee? In a panic, Reed woke her up and had her dial McCabe, who said she had no idea where O'Keefe was either. Now, I think we have to keep in mind there's a lot of things that will be going through a woman's mind at that time when her boyfriend doesn't come home. McCabe hung up and called Chris Albert's wife, Julie, who lived just a few doors down from O'Keefe, to ask if he had passed out at their house. That's interesting because keep in mind, we've been told that O'Keefe was mortal enemies with. That's really strange. I just noticed. All right, I'm not sure who is that where the source is for that information. If it came from Karen or from Jen McCabe, but it would be interesting because we're told that O'Keefe was mortal enemies with, or major enemies with, the nephew. I'm sorry, the son of Chris Albert, Colin Albert. So it would be interesting that somebody thought that O'Keefe actually might have ended up sleeping at Chris Albert's house, which would be strange to do if you were enemies with the kid. Meanwhile, Reed called O'Keefe's lifelong friend, Kerry Roberts, who also lives in Canton. Neither woman had seen or heard from O'Keefe. Where was he? Reed says she wondered. Sorry, I got these dogs very active, in and out. Within an hour, Reed, McCabe, and Roberts met up at McCabe's home, and after returning briefly to O'Keefe's house, that was to bring Karen's car back, they piled into Roberts' car to look for O'Keefe. So this is important to note for the conspiracy people. Karen's car was in the garage from 12:41 until just till about 5, and that's when she went out and drove to McCabe's house. On the map, we know that she took a little bit of a detour. I think the GPS data will eventually tell us exactly where she went, but for now, all we know is she took a little bit of a detour in the direction possibly of the scene of the crime. But based on the evidence that's out there now, we don't know that she actually went there. We don't know. So, and then her car was returned. Looks like probably somewhere between 5:30 and 6 when then the three women went out looking for a job. So, in the back seat, Reed screamed about her boyfriend being missing as the woman drove through the pre-dawn streets of Canton, snow swirling and dancing in the car's headlights. On the dash, the temperature read 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So it would have been pitch dark at that time. As they approached the house where Reed had last seen her boyfriend, she shouted that she spotted him and scrambled out of the car. It was pitch black outside, but on the left side of the property at 34 Fairview, she saw O'Keefe's body lying covered in snow. Reed raced towards him, dropped to her knees beside him, and frantically cleared the snow off his torso. Then she lifted both their shirts and laid on top of him, trying to warm his ice-cold body. So This is something to keep in mind too, that it came out not too long ago that evidence of microscopic taillight pieces were found on John's clothing. Microscopic means invisible to the naked eye. So the more logical, the most plausible explanation for how that got there is that John was very close to the taillight when it was busted. But another explanation that many people buy into is that Trooper Proctor sprinkled microscopic, invisible taillight evidence onto John's clothing at some point. That seems bizarre to me. But very astutely on my team, Erin has said that transference is a very good possibility here. And that seems reasonable to me. We know that Karen and the two women, Kerry and Jen, had looked at Karen's taillight. Now, we don't know how, because Karen had observed that her taillight was broken and she showed the two women. Now, we don't know if they touched it, but if any one of them had touched it and then rubbed their hands on their own clothing, that could be enough to transfer microscopic pieces. Roberts, who had run over to O'Keefe's body, cleared the snow off his face. Reed began giving her boyfriend mouth-to-mouth CPR while Roberts administered chest compressions. Blood ringed his nose and mouth, and his right eye was blackened and swollen. O'Keefe's baseball hat and one of his black Nike sneakers were missing. I don't think they ever found the hat. McCabe rushed over with blankets from the vehicle to warm O'Keefe and dialed 911 at 6:04 a.m. 6:04. As they waited for the ambulance, Reed repeatedly cried out McCabe's and Robert's names over and over. Her boyfriend's blood smeared on her face. Soon, the police arrived, followed by an ambulance that rushed O'Keefe to the Good Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton. Doctors pronounced him dead at 7:50 a.m. Just pause here real quick. One of the things that bothered me all summer was we kept hearing that the Alberts never came out of the house. We don't actually know that they never came out of the house, but it still bothered me. Why wouldn't they be out there as soon as, why wouldn't a Boston cop be out there very quickly when he heard the sirens and the commotion right on his front lawn, right outside his window? He has two windows in the bedroom right over the scene. But I realized later, and from talking to people, this is confirmed, those first responders would have come in without sirens. And I've seen that in my own town here. And I can even add that I was at my parents' house a few weeks ago. We had a blackout. And at 8 p.m., my dad, who is 80, was taking a nap in the den about the same distance from where the Alberts' bedroom would have been from where John's body was found. And it was nighttime, both shades were open. He fell asleep. He's an older guy. He took a nap. Well, there was a tree down right across the street and a power line down right across the street from us. So a fire truck came with all the lights on, but no siren, and parked there for exactly 10 minutes and then left. So about 10, 15 minutes after that, my dad got up and walked out, and, my mom said to him, "Hey, did you took a nap, huh?" And he's like, "No, I didn't take a nap." But we had heard him snoring. And so my mom was like, "Well, did you see the fire truck?" He's like, "What fire truck?" So even it was out there with maybe 50 feet, 60 feet from two windows, and with everything brightly flashing, and it was there for 10 minutes and it didn't wake him up. Now you can say the Alberts aren't 80. That's true. But my dad wasn't drinking and it wasn't 6 a.m. So, I mean, I think it's not really implausible that they didn't wake up, and the whole event happened in about 10, 15 minutes. So back to the article. Detectives began investigating, and within days, Reed was charged with manslaughter on suspicion of hitting O'Keefe with her Lexus. But that wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. A year later, the court case would blow up in local news sites and become the focus of conspiracy theories that ignited protest, ruined reputations, ended friendships, and divided the community of Canton, shredding the social fabric of the tight-knit suburban town. That's certainly true. I've talked to a lot of people from Canton. For 3 days after finding O'Keefe dying in the snow, Reed lay curled up on her parents' couch in the town of Dighton, shocked and confused. What had happened to John? She kept asking herself. She missed him terribly, Reed says, and couldn't believe he was gone. She called her doctor and asked for medication to help her sleep. She had also located an attorney, David Yannetti, online and retained his services. It doesn't say this here, but based on what we know, I believe she contacted that attorney that morning, because her phone, she has fought for complete access to her phone. The authorities, the prosecutors have her phone, but they have not been able to get agreement to access all of the data, and she's claiming attorney-client privilege. So I'm not saying that means that's a sign of guilt, but she did contact a lawyer. Maybe that's just a sign of being a smart, intelligent person, which she is. So she located attorney David Yannetti online and retained his services. When state police trooper Michael Proctor, a longtime Canton resident who is in charge of the criminal investigation, I've actually recently learned that he might not have been technically in charge of the investigation, although he does seem to have written the report. So even if there was a senior officer involved, he seems to have basically run the investigation. So Trooper Proctor, in charge of the investigation, and his partner later came knocking. She answered their questions. The day she returned to her Mansfield home, Reed says she was in her kitchen talking on the phone with a close friend who lived in Florida when she noticed a Chevy Silverado pickup truck parked in front of her house. Soon, she says, about 6 other vehicles appeared. Then, nearly a dozen police officers converged. At 7:40 p.m., officers handcuffed Reed and drove her to the Blue Hills State Police Barracks. I mean, I've never lived anything like that, and I can only imagine how that must feel. Your heart must be racing, whether you're guilty or innocent, or even another possibility is that she really didn't know whether she was guilty or innocent. I think at that point, maybe she didn't. Reed spent the night in jail until the morning when officers took her to her holding cell inside the Stoughton courthouse. Again, it's just an awful thing for someone like that to have to, for anybody, but someone who has that's completely alien to her world. For her to have to go through that is terrible. Reed says that she and Yannetti stood on opposite sides of the jail bars and reviewed the charging documents. The medical examiner had noted several bloody abrasions etched into O'Keefe's right arm, 2 swollen black eyes, a small cut above his right eye, a cut to the left side of the nose, an approximately 2-inch laceration to the back of the head, and multiple skull fractures that resulted in bleeding of the brain. His pancreas was dark red, indicating hypothermia had contributed to his death. I want to pause here quickly too. Having read that, I'm not sure if that's an autopsy or just a medical report, but having read that, the language in that a few times, one of the things I noticed is the first sentence talks about the pancreas and being evidence of hypothermia, but the next sentence is oddly worded, but it seems I even might have used the word trauma. So it doesn't eliminate the possibility that something struck him in the midsection. That's not my particular theory, but people should be aware that that's in the testimony. So it's possible someone in a fight or a vehicle maybe struck him and knocked him backwards. The rest of the information contained in official reports was even harder for Reed to hear. According to witness interviews, Reed had told McCabe she had last seen O'Keefe at the waterfall, that she and O'Keefe had gotten into a fight, and that she didn't remember dropping him off at the post-bar gathering at 34 Fairview. We call that an after hours, but the writer here is more educated. According to Roberts' account in the charging document, Reed was so drunk that night that she told Roberts in the morning she didn't remember anything from the night before, though she had wondered if O'Keefe was dead or got hit by a plow, and that Reed still seemed drunk that morning. Before Roberts, McCabe, and Reed found O'Keefe's body, Roberts told police Reed showed them her cracked, that's the word used here, cracked right taillight, saying she had no idea how it had happened the night before. When an emergency responder asked Reed how O'Keefe had injured his face, the document stated Reed said, "I hit him. I hit him. I hit him." Boy, that's a really different interpretation of everything that I've said, I've heard in this case. That must be in the testimony, but that's really, I had always understood her to Reed, for Karen to be saying, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," that she was thinking about, did I hit him with the vehicle? And it kind of goes back to the My Cousin Vinny movie. I shot the clerk. I shot the clerk. It sounded more like she might have said it as a question, oh my God, did I do this? That kind of thing. But this is a whole new different light on it. I don't really consider it very accurate, but it's possible, that according to that responder, a woman for the fire department, it was when she asked him how he injured his face. So I don't know. Is that firefighter suggesting that Reed punched him in the face? I don't know. I don't know. In addition, it stated that Canton police found a broken cocktail glass and multiple patches of blood in the snow near where O'Keefe's body had been located that morning. The Massachusetts Special Emergency Response Team, CERT, also found pieces of plastic, 2 red and 1 clear, in the same vicinity as the body, items consistent with the broken taillight on Reed's Lexus. The document noted that officials seized the car and found that it had broken glass embedded in the rear bumper, a deep scratch, and a dent on the right side of the rear tailgate, and 2 scratches, plus some chip paint on the right side of the rear bumper. So if you're believing in the conspiracy theory, there was really the only time that Trooper Proctor or someone could have had access to the SUV was at the tow time. The SUV was in John's garage from 12:41 to 5. You can see on the driveway video, there's no footsteps in the snow. So I think the idea that somebody might have broken into the garage at that early morning and smashed her taillight is kind of crazy. Then the car was returned to the garage around just before 6. So at that point, it was just the car was there alone, just with the niece, who would have been awake. But again, there's no signs that anybody broke into the garage, and I don't think there's any signs of any footprints in the snow. And then shortly after that, John's family would have been called, and so I would assume they were arriving pretty early, probably before 7, because they had a 14-year-old niece there by herself, and in a very tragic situation. So there wasn't a lot of time there. And then the car was in the garage until later in the morning when Karen drove home with her dad. Her dad, I think, drove the car. And so in that morning, the house was filled with John's family. So again, nobody broke in and into the garage at that point and sabotaged the taillight. So then the car was in Dighton, where it was under Ring surveillance, because it was in the driveway and they had a Ring camera system at her parents' house. So the car was towed, I think, at 4:12 or something, just before 4:30. I'm not sure how long the trip is, but I guess maybe 45-minute tow. It was towed back to Canton Police. And the state police CERT team officially began their investigation at 5:45. So the idea is suggested is that gave just enough time for somebody to pry off pieces of taillight, including invisible pieces, I guess, and then race out to the scene and bury them in the snow, because it was found buried in the snow. You can see the shovel marks in the picture. It wasn't just sitting on top of the snow. That was one of the many false things that we've been given over the summer. And there's a lot of false things that we were given, which doesn't mean there wasn't a conspiracy, but you have to be really careful about the information that you get. So, but to me, the idea that the crime scene was just sitting there all day unattended is not going to be shown to be true at all. There would have been Canton police cars and state police cars sitting there guarding the scene 100% of the time. Can I prove that to you right now? No, I do have some background information that suggests that's the case, but that's going to come out at trial. They were not going to just leave that completely unattended. There would have been cruisers just sitting there with the lights on all day, making sure nobody disturbed that crime scene. So would have been for someone to go in there and bury that evidence, presumably around between 5 and 5:30. There would be other cops around, and it would have been not that easy to bury it. So, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it's extremely, extremely unlikely by any normal scenario, unless the entire state police CERT team was in on it, which again, who knows, but you're getting into pretty far-fetched territory here. All right, so back to the article. Considering the evidence, police and prosecutors concluded Reed was intoxicated when she backed up and struck her boyfriend and then drove off into the night. In the holding cell, no sooner had Reed and her attorney read the evidence being marshaled against her than a bailiff came for Reed. He led her wide-eyed and terrified, she says, into Stoughton District Court, where O'Keefe's family and dozens of his friends and fellow Boston cops, including uniformed Boston Police Department Superintendent-in-Chief Gregory Long, packed the courtroom. On the other side of the aisle, Reed's mother prayed as a judge arraigned her daughter on manslaughter charges. Then she entered her plea, not guilty. So yeah, it paints a very, it must have been, whether you're guilty or not, an incredibly lonely picture, and certainly deserving of empathy. And my heart totally goes out to the mother. I mean, to have to sit there in those circumstances, it's just, whatever happens in this case, there's no victory, there's no happy ending. This, not only is John dead, but it's a tragedy for so many people. Afterward, Yannetti told reporters outside the courthouse that his client was in shock and that O'Keefe's death had been an innocent accident. So this is Yannetti saying this a few days afterwards outside the courthouse. So at this point, there's no conspiracy theory, and it doesn't seem like Karen is arguing that there is at that point. So she herself must have been convinced that it was an accident, and her focus at that point was to prove that there was no criminal intent, that she loved this man, and that she's devastated. That's what Yannetti said. So you got to keep that in mind, that at that point, her effort was not to prove that she didn't do it. Her effort was to prove that she didn't intend to do it. And you can interpret some of her statements at the crime scene and in the hospital in that light. She wasn't trying to suggest to the first responders that she didn't do it. She wanted to create the impression that she didn't know she did it, and therefore there was an accident. That's one possible interpretation of those comments. All right. It wasn't long before a far more sinister theory of what happened began to emerge. On his drive home this is really interesting. On his drive home after the arraignment, Yannetti says he returned a call to a tipster who had previously called his office. A man with a gravelly voice who initially offered up a fake name picked up the phone and told Yannetti, he recalled, according to Yannetti, something to the effect of, "Your client is innocent. John was beaten up by Brian Albert and his nephew. They broke his nose, and when O'Keefe didn't come to, Brian and a federal agent dumped his body on the front lawn." It says here, an attorney for the man Yannetti identified as the tipster denies Yannetti's version. Look, I see no reason not to identify the man. The man's name is Brian Scanlon, or I might have the first name wrong, but it's Scanlon. I myself have been hearing about this guy all the way back in April in his involvement in the case, and we just don't really know for sure what he found, if he found anything, or he was just hearing something through the rumor mill. By now, hundreds of us have heard the audio of a conversation that this Scanlon had with journalist Aidan Kearney. It's interesting. He certainly, I think Eden did a good job trying to get him to report what he knows, and Scanlon didn't seem to know anything. But he admitted going to Yannetti. So, we don't know what, is it possible that Scanlon knew more and was trying to protect his source? Is it possible that Scanlon just heard rumors? Looking at this information here, it's interesting that he initially offered up a fake name to Yannetti. So that suggests that he wasn't somebody that was out for himself to try to, because in these big cases, people try to inject themselves into the case and become part of the story. You can go all the way back to Lizzie Borden and you'll see that. It happens in any high profile case. That's why you have to be so careful with any information that comes forward. You don't know if someone's giving you real information or they just want to be a part of the case. But if this guy initially offered a fake name, it doesn't seem like he was someone that was just being part of the case. It seems like he was probably someone that sincerely believed that this was going on. So the question is whether he was reporting stuff that he had heard in the rumor mill or whether he had actual information. And I can say I've talked to people in Canton who are from Canton who heard similar rumors about 3 days after the event. But again, you don't know if that's rumor mill stuff. Rumors are easy to get started, or based on something that came from somebody that had been inside the house. All right. So Yannetti didn't know what to think. Was this even plausible? He thought about the people at the after party that night. Brian Albert, the homeowner, was a prominent Boston cop. There was also a federal law enforcement officer at 34 Fairview that night, Brian Higgins, a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, and ATF, with whom both O'Keefe and Reed were friendly. In fact, we know in the discovery evidence, there is, I think, 56 pages of text between Karen and Higgins, but there's also, I think, 26 pages between Reed and Higgins. I don't know when. Doesn't say in the discovery anything about the nature of those texts or when they happened. So given the new information, Yannetti and Reed say they began to believe that Reed was being framed. They hired a private investigator to knock on doors in Canton. Most people turned the gumshoe away. I love gumshoe. I love hearing that old word. But Canton resident Tom Beatty, a friend of both O'Keefe and Reed, offered up a new tidbit. His daughter, who was friends with Brian Albert's nephew, Colin Albert, said that Colin had been at 34 Fairview that night. When Reed heard this, she says, the news transported her back to a night during the spring of 2020 when O'Keefe's home, I'm sorry, I didn't read that right. Transported her back to during the spring of 2020 when O'Keefe's home security alarm went off and he bolted out of bed. She followed him down the stairs and says she remembered seeing Colin Albert and several teens in the front yard. Go fuck yourself, Reed remembered Colin yelling at O'Keefe. Get the fuck out of here, she recalled her boyfriend replied. The next morning, Reed says the couple awoke to a dozen empty Bud Light cans strewn in the bushes. The police were never called, but from then on, she says there was bad blood between Colin and O'Keefe. In fact, she now adds Colin was the only person with whom O'Keefe ever had issues. Well, it certainly would be odd if O'Keefe went to sleep on the couch at that house if he had bad blood with Colin. But who knows? Maybe it's true. After hearing that Colin Albert had been present at 34 Fairview, Reed says another apparent clue in the case soon appeared when Reed and her father, William, met with Yannetti in his office. For the first time, Reed saw police photos of O'Keefe's body. She could barely draw a breath, she recalls, waiting until taking the elevator down back to the lobby to break down in tears. It looked as though someone had beat the shit out of him, she says, and she and her father drove home on Route 93. As she and her father drove home on Route 93, Reed called her mother and described the bizarre injuries on O'Keefe's arm. The mom suggested that they could have been from an animal. Reed called Beatty. Do the Alberts have a dog? She asked. Yes, came the reply. A German Shepherd. Then, 3 months later, Reed says a couple that Reed and O'Keefe had been close to came over to Reed's house for dinner. They had just testified before the grand jury in the case, summoned, along with the others who appeared in Reed's call log the morning O'Keefe died. This was an interesting piece to me in seeing this article because we know that Karen has been fighting the prosecution's access to her data on her phone. But this tells us that they had that data, or at least they had the call log over a year ago, back when the grand jury was going on, well over a year ago. So I'm not sure what parts they're still fighting for. Do they have the GPS data from Karen's phone? I would think so, but none of that's been leaked, which could be telling too, because stuff gets leaked from the defense side that tends to help the defense, whereas the prosecution can't really do that. So, over Italian takeout at Reed's mahogany dining room table next to a sideboard crowded with pictures of Reed and O'Keefe, one with a rosary draped across it, they told Reed that State Trooper Michael Proctor, a Canton resident and lead detective in the case, had mentioned that he had known members of the Albert family for years. To Reed, that sounded like a conflict of interest. When her guests left, she went upstairs to her bedroom, pulled out her laptop, propped herself against the pillows on her enormous white bed. I don't know why we need that detail, and started reading through Proctor's publicly shared Facebook page. That led her to Proctor's sister's account, where Reed says she combed through some 1,300 photos. At 4 a.m., she found what she was looking for, a photo taken at Proctor's sister's wedding that showed a young Colin Albert as the ring bearer. Then Reed found another photo of Proctor's parents and sister alongside members of Chris Albert's family. Reed was speechless. As she sat there in her bed, she says the dots in her mind began to connect, forming a theory of who had really killed O'Keefe, a theory that would prove her innocence. So this really, definitely, you can interpret all this in different ways, but Karen is not just passively sitting back and letting the defense run her defense. She's extremely actively involved in it. In a lot of ways, some of which we'll go into, and maybe some of which we probably shouldn't, but she's been very, very actively involved in the defense from day one. And if you're fighting for your life, that makes sense. The way she saw it, the bad blood with Colin provided the motive for a fight inside the house that night. The Albert's German Shepherd also jumped in, which might explain those mysterious arm injuries. Then the partyers tossed O'Keefe outside to die in the snow. The tipster's information had already helped convince Reed that she was being framed, but she'd wondered who was pulling the strings. Now, Reed says she believes she had the answer. Michael Proctor. Meanwhile, far from coming to the conclusion that someone else had killed O'Keefe, prosecutors doubled down on their belief that Reed was the killer. After the grand jury reviewed the prosecutor's evidence, it concluded there was. So again, when we've always talked about why did the state up the charge from manslaughter to second-degree murder, and that second degree means malicious intent. So this says the grand jury reviewed the prosecutor's evidence and it concluded there was sufficient evidence to also charge her with second-degree murder, implying she had intentionally killed O'Keefe. I should say that intentionally doesn't mean, for instance, a hit and run, I believe, is second-degree murder. If you, or it can be. It's you're willingly leave someone, it's because you're willingly leaving someone to die. So I would guess that that's enough to maybe get that. I mean, unless they have some compelling evidence that we don't know about that, it seems like an overreach, and it may be part of a strategy to try to work out a plea, but who knows? So on June 9th, Proctor himself, along with several other police officers, walked up to Reed's home and once again arrested her. Jesus, that sucks. Why do you have to do it twice? Reed was now facing a potential life sentence in prison. After posting bail at $100,000, she went home to take a long, hot shower. This is getting real, she thought to herself. The stakes kept getting higher. She knew she needed bigger legal guns to help her, which is rational. I mean, you need a team, just like OJ had a team, right? He had the dream team. Unetti's incredibly impressive in court, but so it's not that Unetti's not qualified. It's just obviously you need all hands on deck for a murder charge. 2 months later, Reed sat at her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. She wanted an eye-grabbing subject line for an email she was about to send to Alan Jackson, the famous criminal defense lawyer in Los Angeles who'd once defended Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey. So what she typed out was murder of a Boston cop. So Karen's a very smart woman, not only just managing her defense, managing social media and how to communicate. And it worked. Soon after, Reed, her father, and Unetti all dialed into a conference call with Jackson, who had already received O'Keefe's autopsy over email. As Unetti summarized the case, Jackson interrupted. How the fuck are they saying he got those injuries? Between O'Keefe's swollen black eyes and the gashes on his arm, Reed's boyfriend appeared as though he'd been beaten up before being attacked by a dog, not run over by a car. Reed's lawyers also realized that according to Proctor's original affidavit in February, 6 months earlier, the lead detective said he'd arrived at Reed's parents' house in Dighton at 4:30 and towed her car at 5:30. But the Reed security footage, as well as the Dighton police report, showed that those times were wrong and that Karen's SUV was actually towed closer to 4:12. That 78-minute discrepancy, Reed and her attorneys claim, would have left Proctor alone with the car with plenty of time to break her taillight and plant the pieces at 34 Fairview for the CERT team to find when they arrived at 5:45 p.m. Again, I would be shocked if there were not police sitting at that scene every moment of that day. obviously, but if state trooper arrives, yeah, he would still have access to the scene. So I guess he could plant it under their nose if they're just sitting in their car trying to keep warm. But these pieces were buried. So I think they would notice him getting down in the snow and burying these pieces. So it's, and it's an incredibly high risky thing because so the taillight is described by Karen as cracked. And this is the key thing. We've looked into this. People that look at a broken taillight, they will always call it cracked. It seems to be a common way to describe a broken taillight. If you look at a taillight that's missing pieces, you just commonly will say that's a cracked taillight, which is unfortunate because what we really need is accuracy here. If the taillight was cracked, but no pieces were missing, then yes, there is a conspiracy. If there were pieces missing that morning, then no, there wasn't. And at this point, we are not aware of any video or images that show the condition of that taillight. I've also got the report from how the Dighton officer described it, because he went and inspected the taillight, and he only said damaged. So that didn't really help. So at this point, the key to this case, maybe one way or the other, is we need to find out what was the condition of that taillight. Was it just cracked when the three women saw it and when the Dighton police saw it, and probably Karen's father probably looked at it? I don't know who else looked at it in that time. But something to keep in mind when you're talking about motive here, and every crime, unless you're talking about a serial killer, it comes down to means and motive. So if you're looking at a police officer who is going to plant evidence, you have to look at what motive is. You have to weigh what is the likelihood of, what is the risk? What is the likelihood of him getting caught? And the thing, so if you're going to plant evidence, if you're going to break that pieces off that car 12, well, let's call it, about almost 12 hours after the crime was reported, and maybe 15 hours after the accident happened, it's extremely high risky because all it takes is one image to emerge, one video that shows that taillight intact. And then it's all going to come crashing down and you're going to get caught. And he's not stupid. He's going to know that. Anybody's going to know that. Because all it would take, for instance, let's say Karen and her dad took a picture in the garage of the taillight at John's house. Let's say the Dighton cop took a picture. Let's say there's some clear video that shows it. We still have not seen the video of Karen and her dad backing out of the garage at John's house. That would have been during daylight. So maybe that's going to be a clearer image. All it takes is one image that shows that taillight intact, and people are going to know that the trooper busted it and planted evidence. So it's extremely high risk. So in order to have a motive to take that level of risk to get involved in a murder framing, you need a lot of motive. It's not enough that you want to be cool with that other cop, which has been proposed by someone on another channel. That's crazy. That's crazy talk, literally. You have to have some other. Now there could be some motive like that we don't know. Maybe the Alberts had some kind of dirt on Michael Proctor that forced him to play ball. So maybe there's some motive that hasn't emerged. But at this point, we have very limited means and no known motive. The limited means, the only time that someone could have taken that was from between 4:30 and 5:30, and it would have had to plant it under the eye of other police. So limited means, but it's there. All right, Jackson officially joined the defense team and began looking for evidence that would back up their alternative theory and exonerate Reed. They found suspicious details such as Brian Albert getting rid of his dog and selling his house in the wake of O'Keefe's death. Yeah, on the surface, that is suspicious. I mean, why would you sell your house? I mean, although you could maybe make the case that not selling the house would be a better way to keep control of it. But so still, it wasn't until early March that they found what they considered a bombshell, an incriminating Google search on McCabe's phone, which she had turned over to the prosecution voluntarily. That has to be kept in mind. She was not required to. According to the analysis, McCabe appeared to have Googled how long to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m., the night O'Keefe was killed. That was hours were even looking for O'Keefe. The same search appeared again at 6:23 and 6:24. After McCabe says Reed asked her to search for On April 12th now, see, there's going to be witnesses to that, I believe, that will say that Karen, some of the first responders, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, are witnessed Karen asking Jen to make that search. We'll find that out at the trial. On April 12th of this year, Jackson submitted a 92-page affidavit to the court laying out the defense team's theory in detail. Reed's attorneys knew it would help their efforts if someone in the media started paying attention to their version of events, that there was more to meet the eye in this case. 5 days later, their wish came true. After multiple news tipsters told him to investigate the O'Keefe murder, Aidan Kearney, a blogger who goes by the name Turtle Boy, sat down in his Holden home surrounded by his young kids' plastic toys and board games and read through the case files. Both Kearney and Reed's defense team say they have never been in contact with one another. Kearney, the controversial figure behind TB Daily News, formerly Turtle Boy Sports, says he knew immediately that this was the kind of story his devoted followers would love. Kearney worked on his piece throughout the night, finished at 3 a.m., and posted it under the headline, Canton Cover-Up, Part 1. Corrupt state trooper helps Boston cop cover up murder of fellow officer, frame an innocent girlfriend. There's a few things to talk about here. This was my first exposure to Turtle Boy. I had heard of him before, but I had never seen his show or been to his blog, been to his website. And so I thought it was compelling, and I started doing a series on this case. I would say that at least part of my motives were selfish in that you're trying to build a YouTube channel, and a juicy cover-up is a great way to do it. So I titled my series Framed, but I did put a question mark after it. But the evidence was very compelling that came out of the articles over the next weeks. However, I also understood that we're hearing one side of the case, and we're being fed one side very carefully by the defense. Now, as far as what Turtle Boy said there about how he first became involved in the case, I have very inside information on this, and he's telling the truth. Somebody, at least one person, Jen Altman and some other people, had reached out, were fans of his, and had reached out to him and said, this is something you're interested in. One of them sent him the documents. Now, that was on April 12th. On April 17th, somebody who was working with Altman, and I don't want to say her name, but who was a friend of Karen's, made Karen aware of this, that he was looking into this, and this was a guy that could really get her side out. So it was at that point, one day before, April 17th, one day before his first story, that Karen started working through a friend in Los Angeles directly with Aidan Kearney, through that friend, feeding him evidence. That's consistent with how Aidan has described this here. So I would report it as being mostly truthful. As far as his connection to the defense team, look, there's a connection. A direct connection, I don't, there's a go-between, but there is a connection. But that doesn't mean it's nefarious. I mean, you're a journalist, you get information from wherever you can get it. And in these cases, you're mostly going to get it from the defense, because your prosecution can't really, the prosecution is never going to work with a journalist. They can't. So from the prosecution side, you have to get what they say in the hearings. Or in the case of last week, they had a reply to an appeal made to the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts about Brian Albert's phone, and they used that to show some of the evidence that they have that proves that John never went inside the house. But generally, the leaks are going to come from the defense, and you have to be careful about that, because they're trying to stitch together a narrative out of what they have, and that doesn't mean there isn't a conspiracy. Sometimes but you're going to see this in every big case. They're going to try to take various pieces from the narrative and stitch together an alternative theory to what happened. That's how you try to save your client's life. That's what we see in the Delphi murders, where they've come up with this Odin cult theory. All right, so Kearney's story laid out the theory that Reed's lawyers had presented to the court, alleging that McCabe had planted the idea in Reed's head. This is kind of, he did say this is kind of odd, but so alleging that Jen McCabe had planted the idea in Reed's head that she might have accidentally run over O'Keefe, and implied that Proctor had planted pieces of taillight evidence. So that was I don't know if they still go with that theory, but back at the beginning of this, the theory that they were going with was that to explain why Karen was basically saying, did I do this or I did it? And even seemed to, in the early days after she was arrested, her own attorney was saying it was an accident. They're trying to suggest that the dastardly Jen McCabe planted the idea. I did a series on this back in April. Like, there had to be an evil genius behind this crime based on the theories that were out there. Either Jen McCabe is an evil genius or Karen is an evil genius. I mean, it's just, it's hard to imagine all these people thinking in such sophisticated, evil plot kind of ways. So you have to be careful about that. Again, that gets into the Odin cult theory stuff. That's in the Delphi murders. The idea that so one of the things. So Richard Allen, who's the evidence against him is airtight that he killed Abby and Libby, and his defense lawyers have put out. Richard Allen actually confessed on the phone in prison to his mom and also to his wife. And this is caught, and it's usable evidence. And so his defense team has to come up with an explanation. How do you come up with an explanation for that, right? How do you overcome a confession? Well, they're saying that he was forced to do it by security guards who are part of this cult of Odin. So this is what happens. You get some weird theories that come down, and they can really put it together in a way that seems believable. So in the public, you have to be careful. It's kind of along the ideas of a trooper planting microscopic invisible taillight glass. You got to be careful about that stuff. So Kearney's story laid out the theory that Reed's lawyers had presented to the court, alleging that McCabe had all right, I already said that. So Karen Reed is a completely innocent woman, wrongly charged by corrupt cops who would see her rot in prison in order to cover up a murder of a fellow officer. So that's what Aiden was saying. Kearney suspected that as soon as he published his article, it would blow up online. He was right. Yep, he was right. His website nearly crashed under the strain of traffic, he says. Meanwhile, back in Canton, the coverage was about to rip the town in half. The next day, news of the possible conspiracy spread like wildfire from the deli counter at Shaw's to the links at Brook Meadow Country Club. Before Kearney's piece, there wasn't much talk of O'Keefe's death beyond those immediately involved. Suddenly, it was the topic du jour, and residents started taking sides. In response, the town's police chief tried to ease tensions by releasing a press statement asking for patience. She said, "We've heard the same sensational accounts as our townfolk." This is Chief Helena Rafferty. "Unlike defense attorneys, prosecutors, and police are ethically constrained to what can be said in the outside the courtroom." And it's true. Kearney had no such constraints. He doesn't have a lot of constraints about anything. He continued to write about the case, one story after another, as his monthly page views rocketed from about 1.5 million to 4 million. He began live streaming Canton cover-up stories twice weekly on his YouTube channel and says his viewership increased from 3,000 to 20,000 per episode. I was watching too. So yeah, he's a very articulate guy, can be entertaining, and the story couldn't have happened without him. There's no he claims, and he's correct, that there's no way Karen would have this kind of support without his blog, and that's really undeniable. By the time Reed and her legal team arrived in court 2 weeks later, it was clear to Reed that the tide of public opinion had turned in her favor. A crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. One person shouted, "Go get him, Karen," while someone else chimed in with, "Stand tall, girl, stand tall," Jackson recalls. Reed turned to her lawyers, astounded. As the courtroom door closed behind them, the crowd applauded. It is a dramatic scene, and that will be in a movie someday. Jackson rose and presented the defense's alternative theory, which was essentially what Kearney had posted. The witnesses in the case, those inside the house that night, had hidden evidence of the gruesome events that transpired inside the home and leading to O'Keefe's death. Then their close friend in law enforcement, Michael Proctor, helped cover it up and frame O'Keefe's girlfriend. The prosecutors poked holes in the defense's theory and pushed back with their own evidence against Reed. I think we all can see the prosecutors, leading prosecutor Lally has so far not been very effective in terms of his his courtroom presence. Maybe that'll change during the trial. I'm not doubting his ability, just in terms of presenting things, he's been pretty limited so far. Maybe his hands are tied because of the nature of things until the trial. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the courthouse, the town's residents were at war among themselves. At high school games, parents who once sat side by side cheering now avoided one another's gazes and went silent when someone who disagreed with their take on the case walked by. Oh yeah, it's like that. My social group, someone said, my social group is really small right now because of this. She asked not to be named. I think I know who this is. I only surround myself now with people that I trust. One woman who was born and raised in Canton says it's like bringing up Donald Trump at a dinner party. That's a good comparison. It could just explode. There's a high school reunion this weekend for Canton. It should be really interesting. People don't want people to know which side they're on because, like politics, they don't want to deal with the fallout. At the same time, though, the fault lines often seem to take the same form as old grudges in a town where many families have lived for generations. Says one resident, the problem with this town is that nobody fucking leaves. Most people in Canton are turning on each other because they don't like the Albert family, or they're pissed that Chris Albert was elected to the select board, or they're jealous of Jen from high school, or whatever their stupid bullshit things are. Those are the beefs from high school with these people. And that's so this is the thing. This could be the source of the rumors that Scanlon picked up. Maybe Scanlon had real information, but there's this rumor mill thing that was going on. And it happened, and this is not limited to Canton. It's true in any town, especially a smaller town like that. But even in a big city, it would be true in the neighborhood. Simultaneously, in the actual high school, students turned on one another. You have to pick one side or another, says one father, who saw one of his daughters kicked out of her friend group while the other became borderline suicidal because he believes Karen and her friend's parents don't. That's why that was the tone of my video last week, that it's time to move on. I'm not making, it's my opinion, and I'm not making a pronouncement of guilt or innocence on anybody. But you reach a case at some point that if you're looking closely at the evidence, it is kind of time to start repairing some of those relationships. These are people you have to live with. As the case wore on, Kearney's role in the tabloid drama continued to expand. He became involved in a Facebook group called Justice for John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, which has more than 21,000 members who use the space to dissect nuances of the evidence, pick on witnesses, and one-up each other with hyperbolic insults. Listen, that's true. And this is one of those things too, where I'm sure there are good people involved in these groups, but they don't really want any information. Justice for John O'Keefe means the truth. And at this point, it's not clear what the truth is. But if you believe Karen's innocent, you have to believe in an extremely unlikely conspiracy. So you should at least be open to evidence. If you care about justice for John, you should be open to real evidence from both sides. But the people in that group are not. They are not. And also, when other people are attacked personally or doxxed, no one stands up for them. Now, there's 20,000 people in the group, and most of them are not going to support a lot of the behavior that goes on. But at some point, and I don't know where that point is, it's a gray spot, but I think we've passed it. If you're in a group like that and you see that kind of thing going on and you're not making a stand, you share the guilt in that kind of behavior. So, for instance, the writer of this article, which I think is very balanced and fair, is now being doxxed. People want to go after her. This is unacceptable. And I don't know, I got to think that a lot of the people that don't recognize that now, something's eating their brain, because they would have recognized it a long time. I like to think that my fellow citizens would understand that certain types of behavior are wrong. They're just wrong. You don't need to be told that, and you would have understand that normally. But in this case here, people are not making the kind of stands up to bullying and inappropriate behavior that they should. I don't know. I think after this case is over, a lot of people are going to need to do a lot of soul searching as to why they didn't stand up when they needed to, why they lacked the moral courage. I don't know. In response, the people who were inside the home at 34 Fairview that night, O'Keefe died when Kearney alleges, whom Kearney alleges are truly responsible for his death, and O'Keefe family members and friends started their own private group, an admin of which is a woman who used to write for Kearney until they fell out with each other several years ago, they both say. The two have been locked in a battle, suing each other in court even once. So that's Kate Peters from Mass Trolls, I think is the name of her website. And so, yeah, they clearly have an animus against each other. So if you get information from either one of them on the other, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. It's just because of how deep the hatred is that they have between each other. But also, Kate put out a video a couple of days ago that I thought was very effective and very fair. And look, even if you fully believe in Karen's innocence, I think you need to watch it, because some of the stuff that's going on in this case, do you really want to be associated with it? Do you want to stand in that corner? Is that the side when this is all over and you look back and you're judged by yourself and by your friends and by history, is that really the corner that you want to be in? And I think it's whatever you feel about this story, it's worth watching that video. Mass Trolls is the name of the channel. Kearney refers to himself as a journalist, yet he doesn't simply publish articles or videos to make his point. He has also traveled to Canton and beyond, readers in tow, to directly confront the people he says are responsible for O'Keefe's murder. One day, for instance, Kearney attended McCabe's daughter's publicly held high school lacrosse game in Billerica, where he filmed and live streamed the confrontation for his YouTube followers. So that actually, you can see part of that on the Mass Trolls video. He was saying in the video, "Do you think you could outsmart Karen Read?" He asked her as she sat with her oldest daughter and her friends, trying to ignore him. "Are you worried what's going to happen to your family when you go to jail?" His readers have gone even further, it says, texting and sending McCabe Facebook messages telling McCabe to kill herself. Yeah, you think that doesn't go on? You should see the messages I get, guys. You should see the messages I get. And I'm not involved in any conspiracy. Although actually people think I am now. People think I'm part of the conspiracy. I get those messages too. Is this really the mob that you want to be associated with? And I'm not talking about people who just honestly have looked at the evidence and think that there's a conspiracy. But with that mob-like behavior, do you want to stand in the corner with those people? Is that really what you want to do? You got to decide. Okay, O'Keefe's family, including his brother Paul and his mother Peg, who has lost 2 of her 3 children, John and his sister, argue this is so really tragic. I mean, so Peg, the mother, has lost her daughter to a brain tumor, and then now John to this tragedy. So she has 1 child left. That's the brother Paul, and they arguably received the most pointed vitriol. On his YouTube show, Kearney has said, "With the O'Keefes, enough of the fucking pity party for these people." This is the victims. O'Keefe is the victims. And he says, "With the O'Keefes, enough of the fucking pity party for these people. The only good part about John not being alive is that he doesn't have to be around you useless maggots for a second more. Fuck you. Fuck your high horse. Burn in hell." That's how he talks to John's family. You want to stand with that? Okay. Kearney says he's offended that they believe the state is prosecuting the right person and is glad he's able to use his platform to shine a light on the case. He says, "The beauty of Turtle Boy is that I can do things in an unconventional manner that other journalists are restricted from doing. I love being the center of attention and being theatrical and performing. This is what I was made to do." Yeah, I think he is good at that, and there's a role for it. But then there's a line that you shouldn't cross, and it's clearly been crossed many times. As if to prove his point, on July 22nd, Kearney and more than 100 people, from old men with bushy beards to infants in car seats, gathered in the parking lot of a Shaw's supermarket in Norwood and passed around markers to write slogans on their cars, including "How long for justice?" a play on McCabe's mistyped Google search. Then nearly 50 cars embarked on a rolling rally through the streets of Canton while Turtle Boy followers watched the live stream. Over the next 2 hours, Kearney, who drives a brand new Lexus, stopped at the homes of Brian Albert, Michael Proctor, and Jen McCabe. At each stop, Kearney shouted into a bullhorn, detailing how each person was covering up John O'Keefe's murder. The rally ended up at the Canton Police Department. Some cars passed by and honked their horns in support. Out of the window of one passing car, someone chucked an egg at the protesters. Days later, two chauffeured, blacked-out SUVs rolled to a dramatic stop in front of the Dedham Courthouse, where 100 or so people have been loudly protesting for nearly 2 hours under the blazing sun, holding handmade signs emblazoned with "DA, stop lying," and "Way beyond reasonable doubt." Kearney was shouting into a bullhorn while wearing a gray "How Long to Die in the Cold" t-shirt, which he sells on his website for $22. The boisterous crowd quieted just for a moment as the driver stood by the passenger door, heightening the anticipation. Finally, he opened the door and Jackson stepped out wearing a crisp suit. He turned and offered his hand to Reed, who emerged in a tailored black suit dress and heels. She took in the people there and beamed before walking through the crowd and up the steps into the courthouse. The onlookers that booed O'Keefe's parents, who lowered their heads as they walked past people wearing Free Karen Reed t-shirts. In fairness, I think Eden, through the bullhorn, told him to knock that off. When the doors to the courtroom upstairs finally appeared, the benches on both sides of the gallery filled with spectators. Reed supporters sat on one side while O'Keefe's family and friends wearing Justice for J.J. buttons sat on the other. Assistant District Attorney Adam Lally walked into the room, flushed and balancing a massive stack of folders, as Reed and her 4 lawyers sat coolly at the defense table. Yeah, Lally does sometimes come across as, well, let's say he comes across as Saul from Better Call Saul, or Jimmy, his real name on Better Call Saul. I love that show. After arguing various motions, Lally asked the judge to compel, yet again, Reed and her attorneys to allow the prosecution access to the data from Reed's phone. Though the state police had taken her phone into custody 18 months earlier, prosecutors had been prohibited from analyzing its contents because it contained privileged communications between Reed and her lawyer, Unetti, who she'd called a few hours after O'Keefe died. The prosecution has obvious reasons for wanting Reed's cell phone data. After all, it could reveal who she called. I thought they already had that earlier in the article. It seemed like the grand jury had that, and texted that night and where she went. Or maybe they had that from, maybe they had that call log from the phone company. That's so maybe I have to track back from what I said earlier. Maybe they had that from the phone company. After all, it could reveal who she called and texted that night and where she went in the hours before she called McCabe in the morning. This is particularly important because, according to court filings from the prosecution, O'Keefe's Ring camera registered 15 events between 6 p.m. the night he died and 6 a.m. the next morning. Yet there is no evidence, there's no video of Reed's arrival back home that night. So someone deleted it. Data in her phone could also help explain surveillance footage taken of Reed arriving toward the waterfall at 5:11 a.m., away from the waterfall at 5:15 a.m., and then heading toward 34 Fairview before arriving at McCabe's that morning. What was she doing there, and had she already searched for and found O'Keefe's body? It says in the direct, I've looked at the map, and to me, it's not clear that she went to the waterfall. There's a store there, Cassie's Corner Convenience Store, that's listed in the evidence. There's surveillance video from that. And if you turn there, it brings you in the back towards Fairview. So I'd be curious to see, did she go back to the waterfall? If she did, that suggests that maybe she was telling the truth and didn't remember exactly where she last saw John at that point in time because she was still drunk. And maybe the memories fermented later. I don't know. She now says she saw John go. The latest was that she told 2020 that she saw John walking into the house. So that's a changing story, but maybe her memory's improved. I don't know. But I'm curious to see if she went back to the scene of the crime before she went over to Jen's house. So this might explain how she's, again, they're applying that here. This might explain how she spotted O'Keefe in the dark, given that the police officer who responded to the 9/11 call had to use a spotlight from his cruiser to see the woman. So the implication is that she went back and found him and then went to Jen's. That's a very serious implication that could explain the second-degree charge. Being careful, because we don't know. We have to really see what comes out in the trial. Even foregoing the missing cell phone data, though, there are some possible holes in Reed's alternative theory. For starters, the thesis that O'Keefe was assaulted inside the 34 Fairview hinges on Colin Albert's allegedly contentious relationship with O'Keefe. I personally don't think it does. I mean, I know they've focused a lot on Colin, and supposedly the evidence will show that Colin was gone by the time John got there, John and Karen. But that doesn't mean John wasn't killed in the house. That would just mean he might have been killed by somebody else. So I don't think this has to be a big deal. But anyways, it seems to be. In an exclusive interview, though, Colin Albert told Boston, so this is the first time that he's allowed himself to be interviewed, that he walked out of the house at 34 Fairview right when Brian Albert was arriving, said hello, and stepped into the car of Jennifer McCabe's daughter, who then drove him home. According to court documents, no one else, including O'Keefe, had arrived by that time. Text messages, which Boston has seen, Boston Magazine, confirm he was picked up at 12:10 a.m. and his parents say he was home for the rest of the night. I don't know how text messages could confirm that. So this writer has seen that, but she's not telling us what's in him. So, for instance, if Allie McCabe arrived there at 12:10 and texted him, "Okay, I'm outside," that doesn't mean he got in the car at that time. So I don't know what's in those texts. Maybe he got in the car and as they were driving, texted someone else saying, "I'm on my way home." Maybe his parents. I don't know, but we don't know here, so it's really hard to judge. So his parents say he was home for the rest of the night, all of which counters the theory that his animosity with Colin led to the O'Keefe's death inside the house within minutes of his arrival. And then his friends tossed him onto so there's really nothing proven here as to whether Colin was, based on, in this article, nothing really shows whether Colin had left by that time or not. I mean, so there's some kind of text message and the parents say he was home. But if Colin was involved in a murder, obviously his parents are going to say he was at home. What parents wouldn't? So also problematic for Reed's alternative theory is that according to multiple people who know O'Keefe and Colin in Canton, it doesn't seem there was any bad blood actually between O'Keefe and Colin, as Reed claims there was. What's more, two sources claim the confrontation between O'Keefe and the boisterous beer-drinking teens on his lawn that Reed recalled actually involved another teen entirely and not Colin at all. And when it comes to the suspicions raised by Brian Albert getting rid of his dog and selling his house, a source with knowledge of the situation says Albert got rid of the dog after it got in a fight with another dog, and that he lied, and that he had already, I'm sorry, I'm thinking lied, but it doesn't say that, and that he already had contacted a real estate agent about selling his house prior to the night O'Keefe was killed. So they're reporting that, but that's based on Albert saying that. So unless you actually talk to a real estate agent to say that happened, I don't think you can take that very seriously. And according to the evidence I think we have is that Brian initially said, I don't know. Did he say he didn't have a dog? I think he said he didn't. I don't know. It seems like there may be some, according to the defense anyway, there may be some dishonesty about Albert's original claims about the dog. There also seems to be some holes in the defense's allegations concerning the conduct of investigator Proctor, who Reed's lawyers allege planted evidence at the crime scene. According to the DA's spokesperson, Proctor's police report listing the incorrect time in Dighton, supposed evidence of his having had plenty of time to plant evidence, was simply an error and that it was amended in later filings. Well, the key thing is when was that amended? If it was amended after the defense put out their conspiracy theory, that doesn't rebut the theory. If it was amended before that, then to some degree it does. Police reports and the DA also confirmed that Proctor was never alone with Reed's Lexus and never returned to 34 Fairview after it was seized. I think that's something that will be able to be proven. But again, you get into how large the conspiracy is. Do you think the DA's office is in on it. And I mean, this is the problem with conspiracies. The more people that it's required to have, the harder it is to believe. But apparently the evidence is going to show that he never returned to 34 Fairview, at least in that time period. It says after it was seized. So he may have gone there earlier in the day and then didn't return in the time before the time that the CERT team started searching. An even larger problem for Reed's defense is evidence that there were microscopic pieces of taillight plastic found on O'Keefe's shirt. When it comes to the timestamp on McCabe's Google search for how long it takes to die in the cold, the state's forensic experts say the timestamp of 12:27 was a result of McCabe typing into the search bar of a tab that had been opened at 12:27 a.m. and left open, meaning it does not prove that she executed the search at that time. We've had this discussion many times on my channel, and I believe that is the best explanation. I'm not a data person, but I've looked into the data a lot since then, and one of the things that goes on, even when you look at certain GPS, not GPS direct data, but something like a health app data and things like that, timestamps go into caches and they sit there until the cache uploads and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on with computers that can, and timestamps can be very unreliable because of that. So one of the things that I've learned in this case is you have to look at the totality of evidence. And so if you're just going to even just look at the data of a case, let's say the murder, you can't just look at one data point, because you have to look at everything together and formulate a conclusion that way. All right. Meanwhile, forensic evidence calls into question other aspects of Reed's defense. According to court documents filed by the prosecutor, the medical examiner testified in front of the grand jury that the injuries O'Keefe suffered were not the result of a fight, and the marks in his arm were abrasions caused by blunt force trauma. I've come to agree with that. I'm not a medical examiner, but in my case, my mother is older and she has a problem with injuries. Little tiny scratches on her leg will turn into wounds. People that get older have that. And you have to be really careful because they become infected. And because of the lower blood circulation in your legs, it's a problem. And so I end up taking pictures of her wounds at various stages. So we're trying to look at whether the infection is growing or whether it's shrinking, things like that. And one of the things I learned doing that was that if you zoom in on the wound, which I initially thought was the right way to do it, to get a good look at it, it gives you a very distorted view of it. And something that is a relatively small wound can look particularly monstrous when you zoom in on it. I even just zoom a little. I mean, even just a tiny bit. So what I started doing was eventually I didn't use the zoom feature on your phone at all. I just would get as close as I could to it and take the picture and the real thing. Well, when I look at the dog wound or the alleged dog wounds on John, when I look at those pictures, a close-up makes those wounds look particularly deep. But then if you just look at the actual photo, for instance, as it's held up in court by Alan Jackson, it looks like a shallow wound to me, which is why you would probably call it abrasion. And it doesn't look anywhere near as deep as the wound that would be created by a German Shepherd. But again, that's why we have experts in trials. I'm not an expert at all at that. So I researched dog wounds, and you can try this too. Google it. No two dog wounds look alike. I couldn't find any dog wounds that looked really even close to the abrasions on John's arm, but I also really couldn't find a lot of dog wounds that looked like each other. So it's a really difficult thing. I don't know how the defense is obviously going to find an expert somewhere that testifies that it's dog wounds. That's how defense teams work. But it's going to be very difficult because they're just looking at photos. They didn't get to actually examine the wounds. All right, besides the physical evidence, another piece of the puzzle Reed's lawyers will have to explain is Reed's ever-changing narrative. I've talked about this. People get upset, but it has changed. According to prosecutors, O'Keefe's niece, who Reed woke up to call McCabe, says that Reed changed her story multiple times when she was on the phone with McCabe that morning, and it continued to vary. Reed told Proctor that she dropped O'Keefe off at Fairview and went home because she had a stomachache and that she never saw him enter the house. During an interview with Boston magazine, she said that she saw O'Keefe run up to the house and enter through the door of the breezeway. Then she waited some 10 minutes for him 10 minutes to hear from him that it was copacetic for her to join him and his friends inside the house. And when he didn't answer his calls, she left. Well, her GPS data is going to eventually confirm that if it hasn't already on her phone. Did she stay or did she leave? I don't know. I mean, I would think that she has probably seen that GPS data herself. So I'm not sure why she would lie about it, knowing that it's going to come out. So I would think she's probably telling the truth on that. But so the theory that Reed's team espouses hinges on O'Keefe being inside the house. Yet, according to a statement from Norfolk District Attorney Michael Morrissey, cell phone data from O'Keefe's phone found on the grass beside his body shows the phone never entered the house. It does. And people, so far, everybody, I reported that last week when it came out. Everybody, or not, a lot of people say he's a liar, but then they couldn't explain it, which is kind of revealing. Eden said he's a liar, but then right below said I haven't read the report yet. So I'm a liar, even though he hasn't read the report. So your instinct is just call me a liar and then hope that somebody can help you come up with an explanation as to why I'm lying or why the GPS isn't true. But the GPS, no information, no data is absolutely reliable. So no one should look at that GPS, but that in GPS data and say, aha, that's conclusive. You have to look at the totality of the evidence. But that GPS data is much higher level of reliability than other data. It's not going through as many algorithms. Like you look at the health app data, that health app data is taking the GPS data and running it through more algorithms because the goal is simply to help you on your walk or on your morning run. So it's much less reliable. And the GPS does pretty decisively show that it's extremely unlikely that he went into that house or had any chance to walk into that house. None of this takes into account the fact that prosecutors have evidence they have yet to publicly share and probably won't release until the trial, which is currently set for March 12th. That's something that so many people following this case don't seem to understand about trials. To accept Reed's alternative theory, jurors will have to believe that there was a conspiracy among officers from multiple law enforcement agencies and an emergency responder, several witnesses, a medical examiner, forensic computer experts, O'Keefe's then 14-year-old niece, and his childhood friend, who didn't even know any of the people who the conspiracy is allegedly protecting in order to frame Reed. All they need, though, is reasonable doubt in the defense's case, and Reed's freedom might just depend on it. Still months away from a trial, the case is already making the Hollywood rounds. Dateline has been filming Reed for a show scheduled for release after the verdict. And Kearney says he has been approached by multiple documentary producers, including a few from Netflix. Meanwhile, in Canton, the community continues to convulse under the weight of the tabloid drama. On August 8th, residents packed the second floor Memorial Hall for the Canton Select Board meeting to voice their concerns about Selectman Chris Albert and Canton Police Department and their otherwise quiet and peaceful suburb is being portrayed as a national disgrace. And I also think that's unfair, but corruption happens in every town. And so possibly it's been exposed here in Canton and has to continue to be exposed. Police Chief Rafferty took the microphone and said she could understand people having questions about the O'Keefe case based on the limited information publicly available, but what was unacceptable was witnesses, residents who had not been charged with any crime, being bullied and harassed by either side of the case under the guise of the First Amendment, which I think any sober-minded person would say is fair. Several weeks later, Norfolk DA Morrissey followed up with a recorded video message. Seated in front of a bookshelf of legal tomes, he mentioned evidence that counters much of Reed's alternative theory and pleaded with the public to stop harassing the crime witnesses. We tried people in court and not on the internet for a reason, he said, adding that this was the first and only time during his dozen-year career he'd felt compelled to record such a message. The internet has no rules of evidence. The internet has no punishment for perjury, and the internet does not know all the facts. A couple of weeks after that, at a regularly scheduled town select board hearing, a resident speaking into the microphone broke down in tears. It's been a long 19 months, she said, adding that she wanted to see an independent investigation of the crime to get to the bottom of the incident that has divided her town. That's rational. If you're not sure which side is telling the truth, try to get someone independent. There is one thing that almost everyone in Canton seems to agree. O'Keefe was a good man and a selfless person who, after losing his sister, stepped up to raise her children with love and devotion. He was universally liked in a town that has descended into bitter strife over his untimely death. Still, for now at least, people in Canton are so busy fighting over whether Reed is a criminal or a victim of police corruption that no one is talking much about O'Keefe. There's an update. Looks like maybe a correction. All right. Update September 27th. That's yesterday. 2 sentences in this story have been revised, one for clarity, one for accuracy. The first, court documents state that no one else had arrived at 34 Fairview at the time that Colin Albert had left. Okay. I don't know. I don't know what's corrected. That sounds like what it was reported. Oh, all right. So it must have been changed within the story. Okay. 2, an earlier version of this story characterized Jen McCabe's daughter as Colin Albert's cousin. Jennifer McCabe's daughter and Colin Albert are not blood relatives. Okay, so that's the end of the story. And I thought it was very balanced and fair and gives Karen a chance to state her side, gives Eden a chance, speaks to Karen's attorneys, and also looks at the other side as much as they can, because it's very difficult because the prosecution can't talk to the media. So I thought it was very, very fair and well written, and the writer should be applauded for it. It's absolutely obscene, the idea of people trying to dox this writer and go after her and say she's part of the prosecution or something like that. It's absurd, and people need to start really thinking about some of the things that they say and some of the things they think, because we're getting to the point in this case where it's not yet, but in some of the stranger things that are said, that it's kind of jumped the shark, where you're kind of similar to people that started saying that those airliners that went into the Twin Towers were empty. Now you're getting into kind of an area where you don't want to go. You're getting sucked down a conspiracy theory because of your own need to believe that conspiracy. But keep looking into the case. Never accept my opinion or Eden's opinion or anybody's opinion on this case. Get multiple sources. Wait for the trial. Try to take a rational approach for it. And my team will always try to cover things in a fair and balanced way. We'll get things wrong, but that's how we'll do it. And that's this is my opinion today. These are my opinions, but Dave and Aaron on my team, we will argue things privately and argue things online, and our only interest is to get to the truth for you. Okay, guys, have a good night. Have a good morning. This is the morning. Thank you.